Welcome to a review of all of the games in the Masters of Crime series. The Masters of Crime series are a series of adventure games. They're all standalone games, so you can play them in any order, and they're all set inside criminal worlds. In Vendetta, you are a mafioso and you are trying to solve the murder of the boss's son. In Rapture, you take on the role of a drug cartel boss, and it's not a typical day as a drug boss. You're going to spend the day trying to solve a case involving the disappearance of a famous pop star from the island. In Incognito, you're an undercover FBI agent trying to solve a murder. And in Shadows, you're going to be recruiting your own crew to steal a painting from a museum in Amsterdam. As I already have reviews of these two games on my channel, I'm going to be focusing more on Rapture and Vendetta when it comes to showing materials. So if you want to see more materials from Incognito or Shadows, you'd have to have a look at those videos. The publisher states that the game has 2 to 4 hours of playing time. I'd say that's a bit of an understatement. It has taken me a little bit over 4 hours to complete each game, and I would recommend taking your time with all of them. One of the reasons that these games take so long to play is that the designers have gone to great lengths to try to include something for everybody in these games. There's puzzles, there's mystery, there's a story structure within the game that's very enjoyable to go through. As such, for my review, I decided it would be best to break things down into different categories and rate each game in each category, and you may feel that that is the best way for you to make your decision as to which one you want to play first or which one you want to play next. I also realized that a lot of people don't want to take the time to check out every different category of the game and weigh carefully which game to get, and you just want a summary. So I'll give you the summary right away. I would say whichever of these topics is the most appealing to you, that would be a good place to start. I sometimes play these games with groups after I've already played them by myself, just to get a sense of how people feel about the games and to see how they're able to solve things or what kind of theories they come up with. And the game I've chosen to play with the first group is Vendetta. This is because the mafioso theme is so universally well known due to a number of big movies and TV series like The Sopranos. People kind of have a sense of how these worlds function. So I'm sure this one will be very enjoyed by the group I play with. Personally, the prison-themed game wasn't as interesting for me going in, and I would say overall it's probably the game I enjoyed the least, although I certainly did enjoy it, especially the ending. Now, Shadows was the first game I played in this series. I already had Vendetta at this time, but Shadows was the one I was really looking forward to playing just because I've played so many investigation games. I thought it was such an interesting premise to be putting together a team to steal a painting. And it was certainly, if you have experience in this genre, you'll find that a lot of things that are very cliche in this genre, like the newspaper, when you see it in Shadows, it feels completely fresh. These games are driven by a deck of cards and a number of different types of other content. There's online content, which I'll talk about later. There's also a number of envelopes. You have about 13 envelopes of information, which you'll only open when you receive these documents during the game. Let's have a look at the artwork of the first card you'll see in Rapture, and I'll tell you the first 3 choices that you'll make in the game. The gentleman you can see seated by the beach bar is Larry Winder. He's actually also a character in Vendetta, although he does look a little bit different in Vendetta. And he's the local police chief, and he's telling you about this missing persons case involving the island's famous pop star. Then you have 3 choices to make. I'm not going to read you all the text, but I'll read you the choices. The choices are drug Larry to sedate him so he keeps quiet, try to take Larry's wallet and badge, or leave Larry in peace and start your investigation. And depending on which choice you make, you'll be throwing away certain cards, and you'll receive slightly different information depending on your choice. and there might also be a surprise consequence during the game. Here is a quick glance of all of the in-game materials for Rapture. So we have all of the location cards at the top and at the bottom, and in the middle we have all of the character cards with the missing person, in this case Diana, in the middle. You won't have access to all of these cards at the beginning of the game. You'll start out with the beach bar, and then from there, as things progress, you'll be able to have access to a choice of different locations, and you will visit each of these locations and make choices at each of them. You need to pay attention to detail when looking at all of the cards, as some cards will contain information related to details of the case itself. There are 13 envelopes which you'll access during the game. Rather than using the board, as I have done in previous games, I simply took the envelopes that I obtained when visiting different locations. For example, the first 2 envelopes of the game are connected to what you uncover at the villa, and I kept them together like this. This made it easier for me to access materials. Each of the games is recommended for 1 to 6 players, and how you would play the game, whether you're playing it solo or as a group, is essentially the same for the majority of the case. However, the designers have put in a little activity in each of these games that is designed to make the game more group friendly. In most other cases in the investigation genre, like pretty much any of the games you can see on the screen here, except for the Sherlock files, you're essentially doing the same thing. Whether you're solo and a group, you're looking at the same material. There's no necessary incentive for playing as a group, except if you want to make the game a little bit easier. And of course, it can be more fun to play as a group. Masters of Crime have added some little steps in each game to make it more appealing for the group players. Of the 4 games, Shadows is the most unique as a 3-person experience. When you get to the final heist, there's one group activity. There are ways to play it solo. It would be much more enjoyable and challenging to play it as a group of 3. I think for each of these games, once you pass 3 people, you may be getting negative returns in that people are going to be doing less or having less input. Another aspect of Shadows that makes the game very group friendly is this little chart that you're given at the start of the game. I really recommend having a look at this before you even start the game and just having a little group discussion about how you would go about doing an art heist and just talk over these things. Vendetta and Rapture have pretty fun activity for 3-person groups. In last place in this category is Incognito. There is an activity for a 3-person group within this game. However, it's not that interesting, and you could actually do this activity in any of the games if you actually enjoyed the activity itself. The next category is beginner friendly. So the top games I would say for beginners would be Vendetta and Shadows to play. One area where the game does help you in Shadows is there is one task in this game where if you do what I would say would be the incorrect decision, the decision that would be most likely to lead to your arrest, the game does actually give you more information that would be helpful for you and will help you make future decisions better. And it also rates Vendetta very strongly in this area. Depending on how you approach the game, there might be one piece of information you might not receive depending on which choices you make in the game. But even if you do make an error in that section, you'll be given some hints about that from other characters within the game. Rapture is a kind of the opposite to Shadows in this respect. So when I played Rapture, at the end of the game, there was still one envelope that I hadn't opened. And of course, after the game, when I went through the other choices again, I was interested to find like where did I go wrong that I didn't receive this one in-game envelope. Basically, it all boiled down to a bit of accumulative disadvantage. A bad decision I'd made earlier would have given me some key information that I could have used later. As I didn't have this key information, I made another wrong choice. So Rapture does punish you if you make a mistake on some of its choices. Shadows, on the other hand, may help you. The first area I'm going to rate the games on is the actual worlds themselves that the designers have created. In some cases in these games, it's semi-fictitious in that they're using a mix of real locations as well as fictitious locations. And in Rapture, it's essentially a fictitious location. It's called Cubidos. So you're kind of looking at a hybrid of Cuba and Barbados, typical sort of South American drug dealing hub country. We have two games set in Brooklyn, New York. Shadows is set in Amsterdam. So of these locations, the one that I really liked the most was Rapture. It really surprised me just how charming the world that this game's designers came up with. Is some very like cute pieces of things to look at on those cards while you're involved in this missing persons investigation. I really enjoyed that aspect of the game. There is actually one more game yet to be released in this series, in English that is. It's already available in German. It's called Mosquito, and that one is set in some kind of South American tribe, I believe, or African tribe, where you're trying to solve a murder as well as find some treasure. Looking forward to that even more so after playing Rapture, because I really enjoyed the world of this game. For me, that was the strong point of this game. It just seems like such an enjoyable place to spend your time. I'm sure if this game was actually set in a real location that was this nice and attractive, you'd probably be getting a lot of tourism headed their way after people enjoy this game. The next category is characters. Amongst weaker games, characters can often be an issue. They can often be very thin and simple. They show up, they provide some evidence for having a motive, and then at the end of the game you go through all of the characters and just try to work out which one had an alibi and who didn't, and that's who did it. But in the better games, you're a bit more interested in the lives of the characters and the characters' backstories. And I think Vendetta does a very good job here. One of the unique things about Vendetta is you're not actually trying to work out who killed the victim. The victim was killed during a police raid. So what you're trying to work out is who was it that notified the police of where the victim was going to be. As such, you could have excused the game for having fairly weak characters with little motivation. After all, it's just making a phone call to the police. However, the game's characters all have very strong motives. This leads to one of my favorite parts of the game, which is at the very end of the game, you get to make choices about what to do about the other characters in the game. What should happen to these people that you've investigated and you've found some of their dirty little secrets? Should you be kind to them and treat them well? Should you help them? Or should you punish them? And what kind of punishment should you give them? I think that aspect of Vendetta is also one of its strongest points. In Incognito, I didn't have the same sense of strength of the characters here, but they did provide some very good choices to make at the end of the game when it comes to determining what to do with the characters. In Rapture, the suspects list is a little bit less interesting, and I didn't find that the set of options you have at the end of the game were as thought-provoking or interesting as what you get in Incognito and Vendetta. In Shadows, the characters are a bit thin. I do discuss this in my Shadows video review if you want more information on that. Let's talk about puzzles. So these games do have an escape room game element. You'll be asked to solve different puzzles. Often it is PIN numbers or login IDs at different stages of each game. So I played Shadows and Vendetta first, and then I played Incognito, and I can clearly remember during the playing of Incognito thinking the one thing I'm not looking forward to when it comes to playing Rapture is having to find more PIN code info. And then I was surprised when I actually played Rapture, and they did have a beautiful way of providing you with some login details. I thought the puzzles in Rapture were very fun. They were quite simple. I will say that one of the tasks, it wasn't really clear how you were meant to approach it. One of the things that happens in these games is you'll see on a card a symbol which tells you have to go onto the company's website and enter some codes. And then after you enter the code, you usually get some information. For example, you can now access this location and so on. In Rapture, one of the locations, it was a bit unclear as to how you should access this location. Because of that, I just went to the website and looked up how do you actually access the location. And instead of providing a hint, it just told you straight away. So it did cost me the opportunity of putting in a bit more work to try and pin down the information for this part of the story. And it wasn't that I didn't understand what was needed. I just didn't know at what stage of the game I was going to have to be doing an actual task with the title maps. I thought that was something that was still to come. So Shadows and Vendetta, their puzzles are quite enjoyable. I liked the incorporation of real art in one of the puzzles in Shadows. I liked the incorporation of different locations when it came to entering PIN numbers for some of the lockers in Vendetta. Where Incognito disappointed me a little bit is it takes a detour from being about a prison. One of their activities is related to books. Of course, at the time you're in a prison library, so it makes sense, but I don't know, it wasn't really what you had in mind when picking up a prison game, right? Something about a library puzzle, right? You wanted something a little bit more prison related. I did have a significant issue with one of the puzzles in the game, and most importantly, the issue was not that the puzzle was too difficult, it was that the hints weren't suitable. What I expect when I play these kinds of games is there will be a hint system that will nudge me in the right direction, and the Incognito hint system didn't do that. I knew what information I was supposed to be using, but I just didn't understand the way it was presented to me. And in the last video, I did criticize only having 2 hints for each section, and I noticed that in Rapture, they have 3 hints for some of the sections of the game. So maybe the designers did get some feedback at some point that they need more hints in these games. And hopefully, in the future, if you're playing Incognito in a few months from now, maybe the designers will have added an extra step to the website. Each of the game is recommended for people of 16 years of age and over. I'm not going to rate anything in regards to this. I will say that Incognito does pull its punches a little bit in that it's not giving you certain aspects of the prison experience that you may expect from seeing other prison content in popular culture. I think in the case of Rapture, the designers may have done themselves a disservice in the sense that this game, it was so charming and so cute and so fun that it might have been more profitable for them to just have this as a standard investigation game. If you were, instead of being a drug lord, if your character was the local police detective, it might be more appealing to people under the age of 15. Let's talk about the in-game choices. I thought the in-game choices in Vendetta and Shadows were the best. I'm referring here to the types of choices you make during the gameplay, not at the ending of these games. The choices in Shadows and Vendetta, it was usually fairly clear after doing some deduction what the correct path through the game was. I felt that in Incognito and Rapture, a lot of the choices did feel a little bit arbitrary. The actual scoring that the game gives you as feedback kind of reflected this, in that choice A might get 1 star and choice B might get 1 star as well. Maybe choice C got 0 stars. Endings are very important when it comes to mysteries, and I thought Vendetta's ending was very good. Some people might think the end of this game is a little too harsh, so you might disagree with me. As the game is set in criminal worlds, we get a very interesting choice at the end of some of these games. I thought the choices at the end of Incognito and Rapture were very good. Shadows was a little bit less interesting in this regard. I think Shadows itself, the sense of anticipation that it comes out of making choices during the planning stage of this game is what derived the most satisfaction for me. And as the heist played out, it maybe fizzled a little bit at the end. And that brings me to the next section on post-game choices. At the end of a standard good quality mystery game, you're going to have unraveled a lot of different stories. You'll have the main storyline revolving around the culprit, and this person will be arrested and they'll spend the rest of their life behind bars. Then you'll always have these other interesting little subplots, and usually once the game's over, those subplots kind of evaporate and we don't know what happens next. One of the great things about the Masters of Crime series is these post-game choices where you, in your criminal role, now have the opportunity to influence the events that happen next. And I really liked Vendetta and Incognito's choices. You get some really interesting choices. I think this aspect is what makes these games really unique as date game experiences. I think there could be a lot of couples that would break up after playing Vendetta and Incognito just because they might realize that the other person's viewpoints are somewhat horrific to them. In the case of Rapture, I didn't find the endgame choices as interesting as in the other games. The replayability of these games is quite limited. While you're not going to be destroying any of the game content, you are going to be seeing most of the information. So replaying the game is probably not something that most people will do. The game that would have the most replayability here would be Shadows. In Shadows, you are selecting a team to take on the task of performing a heist. So one option would be to replay the game and select a different set of characters for the heist and see how it plays out. One interesting way you can approach the game Shadows itself is you can approach it with the idea of saying, hey, I want to be the director of a comedy heist. I want to choose the worst people for the heist. I want to see what happens. Or you can choose to be the director of a elite crew heist movie. As I mentioned earlier with Rapture, depending on your choices early in the game, you may end up missing quite a significant piece of information that will really change the way you look at one, actually even more than one player, one character within this game. So it would have some replayability in that sense. However, it's always going to be the same solution at the end of the game. The next category we'll look at is online content. These games do contain a lot of online content. There's not only a website that's there to support you via hints and offering solutions and telling you what you need to do to access different locations within each game. There are also a lot of websites that have been designed for you to stumble across during the game. And I don't mean you're going to be doing weird Google searches. You'll see a business card that has a web address on, and then you'll enter the web address and see what kind of information you can get. For Vendetta, you get things like casinos, hotels, things like that. For Shadows, you get obviously the art gallery's website. Rapture does have some good online content. One thing I really liked about their online content was the music. There's actually a song, and the song itself is used in solving one of the game's puzzles. It was really fun. The song quality was good. I enjoyed listening to it. You also get a little quiz in Shadows and Rapture. I think in the Shadows game, if you answer any question incorrectly, you're basically expected to do the quiz from scratch and answer everything correctly. In Rapture, the quiz is taken a little bit less seriously. In fact, depending on the choices you make during the game, you may not have all of the information to answer the questions. So if you do take the trivia quiz and you answer anything incorrectly, you'll just be given the answers. Some people may dislike the quiz works in this way and they may want the second chance of getting everything correct. But I personally liked that I didn't have to reread everything just to get minor details like what was her debut album and so on. The online content in Incognito is less interesting. It's essentially accessing things like prison databases. There is one quite interesting little challenge where you have to get a prison warden to leave her desk. I quite enjoyed that. One area that Rapture differs from the other games in terms of online content is each of the other games has a bit of do your own online research. They might give you a word and then they'll give you a globe symbol, and the globe symbol means you have to do some online research to find out more information on this topic. Rapture doesn't have any of that. You may find that is an appeal point for you for playing Rapture. You may find it's something that turns you off. You might like doing that online homework. I did enjoy it with the other games. The most significant negative for me in Incognito, which I mentioned earlier, was the hints relating to one of the puzzles that I found difficult. Rapture, I mentioned earlier, there was an issue with knowing when to access a certain location, which resulted in me not putting in the work to complete the puzzle just because I simply didn't realize I was expected to at that time. Shadows and Vendetta do use Google Maps, and I've noticed, not just from my own experience, but also seeing how the Co-op for Two channel did with their live streams, they had some frustrations within the use of the Google Maps itself. For me, the major issue is how they want you to answer the question and how the game responds when you give an incorrect answer. For me, the anticipation that was built into Shadows was something that was really unmatchable when it came to the other games, because in Shadows, almost everything you're doing is having some kind of future effect. You're taking cards and putting them into another card deck. It feels a little bit like you're part of a magic trick. And it's really interesting to find out how your choices affect what happens in the future. So Shadows, I'm guessing, is going to be my favorite of the games just because it was such a novel experience. I'd probably rate Vendetta as the second best game in the series. I think the murder case itself was pretty interesting. Well, not actually a murder, the snitch case, who was the snitch, was pretty interesting. Rapture, the case itself was less interesting than the experience of going around this charming, beautiful, idyllic little paradise island. And Incognito was very much a case of a prison experience. The case itself, not as interesting as I would say of Vendetta, but it was still a decent case. For me, this was maybe the weakest of the games, but if you are interested in a prison-themed game, I still, hope that I'm not putting you off getting Incognito, because you probably will enjoy it, even if you might have some disappointments with certain sections of the game. I mentioned in the last video that the next video would probably be a look at the DECKTECTIVE series. There's now only one DECKTECTIVE case that I've yet to complete, so hopefully I'll complete that soon, and then I'll be following up this video with a look at the DECKTECTIVE series. See you for that.